All right, well, welcome to our breakfast this morning. I think you're going to enjoy this. Obviously, you're interested because we have a great turnout, so thank you all for coming. We have one more breakfast this spring, and I would encourage you to mark the date, April 4th. We're going to talk about the solar farm down in Jefferson, sustainability, solar energy, and all those other good things. Dan Litchfield is an executive vice president with Invenergy, and he will be here talking about it. Don't know where the project stands today. He has another one up in the North Country here in Wisconsin that actually is going forward with permitting. So he's going to talk about that, and then he'll talk about the one in Jefferson. So we would encourage you to come and listen to that and hear what's going on. All right? So I don't think I have anything else. So let's have a word of prayer, and then we're going to have Nate come over, and we'll get started. So let's pray. Father, we love you. We're so grateful for the day and grateful for the opportunity we have to meet together here today. Thank you for these good folks and for the community that's so supportive of our university. We do pray for this town. We do appreciate all that it does and what a great place it is for us to live. Father, we're thankful for your goodness. And Father, we just pray that you might bless our time together, that it might please and honor you. And we'll praise you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so it was 2013 that we did our first economic breakfast. And Partnership Bank from that day to today has been our partner in providing the economic breakfast that we do every year. And we've tried very hard not to do a typical economic breakfast because you can go do those just about anywhere. So we're really focused on our local community. So Nate is the president here of Partnership Bank, and we're going to ask Nate Salas to come up and get us started. So come on up, Nate.
Thank you, Steve. Also want to extend a thank you to all of you for coming out. I know that both Steve and I are always humbled by the support we get from the community for this annual event. And we know you guys got to make time in your day, so thank you for coming out. Having said that, we also recognize that we're fortunate that today was the day for the event and not yesterday. Let's not kid ourselves. If it had been yesterday, it'd be Steve and myself, and it'd have been a really horrible panel discussion. So we recognize how fortune plays a role in today's event, too. Before we get to the panel discussion, which we've got some amazing experts here, I'm sure you've all read their bios. They've got over 100 years of combined, experience in communities across the country. But no, I think today's focus is really to bring it home. And we know we've got a couple of questions. We're going to get about an inch deep. We're not going to get a mile deep. But we're hoping is it'll spur some thoughts and curiosity in all of you. It'll give you some insight. And at the end of today's format, there's going to be about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Steve and Joel, two of the tallest guys here in the room, will be walking around with microphones. They'll be in the back. Please flag them down because we want you to hear something. If you hear something, a comment made, ask a follow-up question. This is a great opportunity for us all to learn. So before we get to the panel discussion, of course, I've got to do the obligatory commercial. That just wouldn't be right if I didn't do that. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what makes our banking team unique. And what I'll start with is, our team has an opportunity to talk with business owners, ag producers all throughout the year. And of course, we ask the obligatory banking question. So, how was business this year? Well, we have never, and I mean ever, heard an owner respond with, it was great, we took out more debt. Never heard that response. Can't imagine why. We hear things like, it was great, we grew our sales, I was able to hire more talent, I was able to pay down more debt. So, our team recognizes that our clients don't measure success based on the number of loans they have. And so we take the time to think about, we talk about, we find ways that we can positively impact our clients' business success beyond banking. And what that means is, as we understand our clients, where they want to go, it's maybe bringing vendors to the table that will help them spur more profitability, more growth. It's looking at synergies between our clients within our portfolio and bringing them together so they can both grow together. Sometimes it's as simple as asking some insightful questions and bringing some of our experience from other clients that have been successful to the table and helping our clients to focus on working on their business, not in their business. So if you're looking for a financial institution and a banking team that can lend you capital, but as importantly, bring intellectual capital to the table, give us a call. All right, having said that, I want to bring our panel up. I'm going to be the moderator today. So I'm going to try and keep this unruly bunch harnessed and focused. If you've been around economic development people before, you know that if you ask them a question, it could be 5 hours later and they're still talking. So first I'm going to introduce Kristen Fish, if you want to come up, with Redevelopment Resources. And then we have Vicki Pratt with Thrive Economic Development for Jefferson and Dodge County. And then Bob Duffy, who's joined us from the city of Oconomowoc. Thank you, guys. So as I mentioned, for today's format, we're going to ask several questions. We're going to just kind of rotate along the panel here, and each have a few minutes to address and give some thoughts. And then what I'd ask you guys to do is, write down things that triggered some curiosity. And if you've got questions, hold those, write them down, and at the end, like I said, we're going to save at least 10 to 15 minutes, maybe even more, for you guys to ask questions and engage with our panel. And we're going to rotate through. So we'll start with Kristen. I'm going to start with the first question, and then if you will pass the microphone along, whoever I need to. Oh, Bob's got one. Okay, great. I forgot my timing mechanism, my phone. Make sure we stay on time. Let me just get this set. All right, Kristen. So the first question, what are some of the major headwinds to growth communities are facing? What are one or two key strategies communities have deployed to overcome those challenges?
Thanks, Nate. That's not an easy answer, and a little bit background on myself. I work in many communities. Watertown is one that I've been working with for the last 5 years or so. So from Watertown's perspective, I'll let Vicki take it from a county as far as job creation is concerned. But oftentimes a lot of the communities we work in are facing headwinds regarding employment, and major employers are having a hard time finding qualified employees. That's happening everywhere. Every conference we go to, talent attraction is one of the major problems, one of the major headwinds. We used to hear things like access to capital was a problem. That continues to be somewhat of a problem, but that's changed a little bit. Effective housing or affordable housing, market rate housing, workforce housing is another headwind. So when I look at economic and community development, I look at it as the circle of life, kind of. We used to, as professionals, be focused on recruiting businesses to communities, and we still try to do that. We still try to attract businesses, but it's become more of a focus on talent attraction and attracting people to communities, because we've found that especially younger generations look to where they want to live and then find a job. So it becomes about community development. So as economic development practitioners, our jobs have changed a lot in the last 10 years or so, because we used to be focused on attracting businesses. Now we're focused on attracting people, which means community development. And we have to keep all these balls in the air at the same time. So headwinds communities are facing, I would say, include attracting people and then making their community an attractive place that people want to be. Those are the big buckets, and I can let Vicki and Bob take it from there. You want to go next?
That's fine. And again, so is this on? So from Oconomowoc's perspective, again, what Kristen said globally is something every community, not only in this state but throughout the country, are facing. Some of the challenge in Oconomowoc, we're in a different place than we were even 5 years ago. So some of our issues have to do with, obviously you read what's going on with closures and some of that, and underutilized property, and how do you deal with things that like a golf course that you didn't anticipate was never going to be there, the costs of infrastructure. Workforce housing is definitely a conversation you'll continue to hear about in Oconomowoc. Most of what we're trying to do harbors upon that whole essence of creating amenities to attract people. Interestingly, as I drove in here today, we are becoming a workforce center where we were never before. Everybody drives east. Our community, who lives in our community, drives east. When I drove in on 16, there were a lot of people driving east, likely to Oconomowoc, given the healthcare facilities and some of those other elements. So I think the other thing that we really struggle a little bit with, and every local unit of government will continue to struggle with, is deploying that infrastructure necessary and have the money to do that in order for development to happen.
And I will echo everything that my colleagues have said and add to that. I mean, when you look at truly major headwinds, certainly in the state of Wisconsin, I see demographics as our major headwind. What I mean by that is when we look at, yes, the short-term reality is we can't find workers. The long-term reality is when you look at the demographic projections going forward in the state of Wisconsin, when you look specifically, I'm responsible for Dodge and Jefferson counties, and when I look at those population projections, the numbers of people over the age of 65 versus the number of people that are working aged, those population projections are very, very scary. And I would say to you, and we understand this is a non-sustainable business model. This won't work. It just won't work because there's no one to work, right? And if you don't have workers, you probably aren't going to have businesses. So this is a big deal. It's real. It's scary. And so it comes down to attracting residents. And, newsflash, people just aren't moving to the state of Wisconsin from all over the place. Folks know this. We talk about this at the state level. We talk about this at regional meetings as well. The numbers are there to show that people are simply not moving here. So what are we willing to do to get what we want? So you've probably seen these articles. I've certainly seen a lot of them, but maybe that's just a result of what passes my desk. States, regions, communities around the country are doing everything from offering money to people to move there, because this is, in many areas of the country, this is exactly the same story. Now, it's not true in the Southwest or the Southeast, and little pockets in places north of the Mason-Dixon line. But people are getting very, very aggressive. Communities are getting aggressive. Government's getting aggressive in a lot of these other places to try to attract people to live there, because they know that talent will attract business investment, right? Business has to have workers. We are never going to automate everything. So there's some harsh realities here. So the second part of Nate's question, key strategies that I've seen deployed, I've seen communities create programs to help people acclimate to their communities. So billboards are nice, right? We're going to go market and we're going to say move to Wisconsin. Well, who do you call? Who do you talk to? Where's your help in terms of finding housing that's appropriate for your needs? Figuring out which school is best for your kids. Just getting all these kinds of things. So I've worked in communities where we've had those kind of, oops, must be my time's up. Never mind, we'll talk about that later.
It's a really subtle way to get them to move on. I forgot that thing was going to start ringing, my fault. But, actually, Vicki, I want a follow-up question, because everybody talked about workforce housing. That's a buzzword you guys are using. I don't know if everybody here in this room understands. What is workforce housing in the economic space? What does that mean?
Again, every county is different based on what that income level is. In Waukesha County, you have to be within the county median income. $38,000 is the target in Waukesha County. I mean, if you've heard what's happening in our community, again, the Olympia Resort was purchased specifically to create workforce housing. I mean, we're seeing an adaptive reuse of an existing facility because there is a need. And our access point at I-94 and 67 and everything going on, we recognize it as a need and are continuing to try to work with, whether it's with WIDA and some of those elements. But again, because market rate in our community is pretty expensive. We built apartments downtown. People are living down there because they want to live there, but that is not, that's more than many people's mortgage to live in apartments. So that is another interesting challenge with communities is what are those housing types and how do they become affordable related to the workforce that needs to be in your community and stay in it.
Anything else to add?
I was just going to say, so both Dodge County and Jefferson County, in their budgets for 2019, have set aside some dollars to do those housing studies to be able to determine exactly what Bob is talking about. Bob's got a city. I'm working in 2 counties, so it's very different because just because of the geography and because of the market conditions in those 2 cities. But at the end of the day, the cost of building those structures is pretty much the same, whether it's in Waupun or it's in Oconomowoc or it's in Fort Atkinson or it's in Watertown. Those costs of construction are pretty much the same, but if you can't get the same market rates, the developers are just not as attracted to the notion that they should, come here and build. So this is what we're really up against when we start talking about the issues related to affordable housing. And then, to drill down to Bob's point, what's that price point and understanding what your market can bear and then trying to figure out a way to get that built in your community and make it sustainable, right? Because people got to live there.
And it might not be building new homes. It might be building something that will free up homes for other people. For example, if Watertown is successful in attracting high-end or market rate apartment development on the site next to the town square, that will be filled with people who have disposable income, significant disposable income, because those apartments will be at the higher end of what Watertown has on the market. And that will hopefully free up homes from people leaving the obligation to shovel and mow the lawn and wanting to downsize and create inventory so the realtors have something to sell people who are looking for maybe their first home or their, a home to grow their family in. So there are strategies that we can get in the weeds about how to make housing available, but we have to think outside the box at every turn. So
obviously, there's moving parts, there's variables, and these isn't just in a vacuum when you decide to make a change with housing. There's a lot that goes into it. Thank you guys for digging a little deeper on that topic. Next question I'd like you guys to address and discuss. What are several key differentiators between growing and stagnant communities? And I'd like to start with Vicki.
So, kind of the obvious, right? A growing community has rising household income levels over time. There is a prevalence of export businesses and jobs, increasing property values, so those property values are rising over time. School enrollments are rising over time. Subsidized school lunch programs are decreasing. I mean, those are all data points that you look at and say, okay, so that is a growing community. A stagnant economy, a stagnant community, again, decreasing or stagnant household income levels, declining school enrollments, increasing school lunch rates, so subsidized school lunch rates, increasing poverty levels. You also tend to see a lot of empty storefronts or many properties in disrepair. And this is important because I'm not sure why Nate put this question in here, but here's what I think he did. Because for those of us who have been driving that corporate real estate exec, that site selector, that CEO around your communities to look at sites and buildings that you're trying to get them interested in, we do what we call the windshield tour. And we're very skilled at not driving them past stuff we don't want them to see, right? But when you live in a community and you see these homes and buildings in disrepair over time, especially in a small community, it's like you know everybody. You say, oh, that's poor old Joe, and his wife has had cancer for a couple of years, and you see this house in disrepair. But that site selector, that CEO who's sitting in the front seat next to me, looks out the window and says, and I've had this happen to me, this is why I say it, and says, the people who live here don't invest in their community, why should I? Well, that's a very powerful statement when you hear that in your ear and you're going, oh, it's not what I wanted them to see. So I think it's important to look at your community through a different lens. Sometimes you actually have to bring somebody else in and drive them around with you and get their opinion as to what your community looks like.
You know, from a local unit of government perspective, I think, and I'll take it from the leadership standpoint, because oftentimes that's where the activity starts to happen. Having that vision and those goals to be able to achieve, you know, we not only have a plan, we have a strategic plan, and our council prioritizes those things, which gives direction. And the other thing that it does is it drives outcomes. You know, we as government are supposed to operate like a business, and if you do that, outcomes are the key. The delivery of service for a value price point, you know, we're fortunate because we have our utility and all of those types of things, but success and growth begets success. It creates activity, it creates interest, it creates more and more people wanting to be part of that, whether that's housing, business, and whatnot. I think what you see from, and again, it's a cycle. Every community goes through a cycle. 10 years ago, we weren't what we were. Downtown was not a good place, but it took, you know, a great commitment, financial commitment. Some communities are communities who are stagnant, you use that word, are complacent. Well, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? And that comment that Vicki made about if they're not investing, why should I? The real estate world looks at that and goes, well, I'll move on to the next place that's willing to do that. So again, I think that's all kind of that balance of continue to make your community interesting, community drives people to it, business, residents, all of the above.
So Vicki started with a very data-driven perspective on growing versus stagnant, and in my mind, right away I went to the more softer elements of that, including leadership, which Bob mentioned, engagement, vision, collaboration, and I could go on and on with these really kind of fuzzy elements, but it's so true in all the communities we've worked in. If the leadership of the community isn't engaged and driving a vision, then it's always somebody else that's trying to do that. And we just got a contract in a community near here that the leadership has been very responsive, but not proactive. They've been reactive and responsive, and that's not a bad thing. However, there's a young group of business owners in that community that is saying, we want something better for our future, for our community, and they're pushing the agenda and the envelope. So the difference between some communities, between growing and stagnant, is who's driving the vision and where that leadership comes from. And if it's not at the elected level, then there often is an element that's saying, we want this for our community, and they'll encourage from another direction, which is important. So what I love about the "and" video that you saw, that collaboration and engagement across the spectrum of community entities is super important. So Watertown is so fortunate to have this group of people come together that are leading efforts to improve the community. And they're not just saying, is it going to be the town square or the library? It's going to be the town square and the library. And is a very powerful statement that stands for another new development. And we'd love for you all to embrace this and realize that the school district, the library, the YMCA, the foundation, the Main Street, the chamber, the RDA, the tourism group, the trail group, they're all at the table saying, we want all of this for Watertown. And so it's engagement, collaboration, leadership, and vision, I think.
And I'm just going to add to that, and thank you for being the softer side, because I'm not. Happy Galentine's Day, girls, right? Own it. I can't help myself. There's more. There's an and. You need to put your money where your mouth is, right? And patient capital investing over time is what works. And all of us have seen this all over the country. I mean, I used to fill an airplane with people and take them to other cities to show them what happens in those communities when the community, municipal investors, all would put capital towards their vision over time. and watch what happens, right? Because there's this notion that, well, I spent $100,000, what'd I get for it? Maybe nothing today, but you have to think about this as a long-term endeavor, because your community didn't get to look like this in a week, right? It took a while. And if you're really going to change it, it takes a while to change it. But you have to continue to invest over time and be patient. And yes, you need the vision and you need the passion. You need all of that. But you also need the money. So it's the old, what do you want? Is what you're doing getting you what you want? And what are you willing to do to get what you want? Because if you're not willing to make that final big investment, you know, it's a plan. It sits on the shelf.
Thank you, guys. I wanted to add a comment as well. I was fortunate enough this last year to join several community leaders, and we flew out to Danville, Virginia. It's a town very similar to Watertown. But the reason I share that story is everything that was just talked about here about vision, collaboration, leadership, about putting your money where your mouth is, about actually working together to have outcomes that are measurable. This community is about 42,000. Their unemployment rate when we're back at the Great Recession was as much as 50%. They had textile industries that were leaving and tobacco. And, you know, they focus on their downtown. It's along a river. They've put money there. They built a YMCA, trails. I mean, they're revitalizing their downtown. And so, you know, that's Virginia. I mean, just look down the road at Hartford. If you've seen any of the recent articles coming out of Hartford about how their business leaders, because the community wasn't as proactive, were asking for change. We need to attract talent. We need to attract workers. We need to see a change. And they're investing in that downtown. That's in hotels. That's in housing. That was in a public library. So, you know, there's a lot of things that communities are doing in the state and out of the state, but they all reinforce the stories that, you know, our experts are talking about. So thank you, guys. Third question, I'd like to start with Bob in this instance. What kind of incentives can communities leverage when attracting new investment? Can you provide some examples?
Sure. Again, from a development perspective, I think, one, being welcoming and have an efficient process. It's not a financial incentive, but boy, it means a lot to the developers where time is money. Over and over again, that is something that they continue to talk to us about. In rebuilding in our downtown, we've been very fortunate, and we have a community bank in our community who has requirements of community reinvestment. We've leveraged our relationship with them in order to create loans for entrepreneurs. Low interest loans have really filled our downtown and made it happen. So that's been a tremendous incentive. Talked about our utilities. We have the benefit of having cheaper utilities than anybody around us because we're publicly owned. That is an attraction tool we use. Within certain areas, this is where it combines the vision and the incentive to make things happen. Most of what's happening in our downtown right now is market-driven. And what we've tied it to when we get involved in a TIF district component is making sure we're tying it back to our plan and what are those incentives or amenities that the community wants. Although some of them are larger structures, believe me, they're all selling. We actually have more lake frontage in downtown Oconomowoc than we did 10 years ago. We as a public entity own and control more than we ever have. And behind those large developments, we have a pedestrian path that now connects our Veterans Park to our city beach. Public access that never was there before. So the opinion is, I could see the lake before when they really couldn't. The reality is they will continue to be able to do that forever and ever through our leveraging incentives in order for, one, the market-based development to happen, and two, the amenities the community really wants.
So in terms of incentives, there are, the obvious tools we have in our toolbox. The most useful tool is tax increment financing, or TIF, and that's a municipal level tool. It's not the end-all be-all, but in a lot of communities, it's all they have. When the deals get really complicated, we try to layer in other things that may or may not be cash or financial incentives like technical assistance, but there are programs through the state and federally that include tax credits for some developments, other gap financing programs that might be lower interest loans with longer terms. You can get creative with some of those and use TIF to create a loan program like we did downtown in Watertown. We also sought the resources of some local banks to supplement that. It's trying to think outside the box, and sometimes deals end up with layers and layers of incentives that, could it be a construction loan that's then taken out by a TIF loan, or, it gets kind of complicated. And I did go to one conference once where it was mostly developers, and I said, is the reason that you sometimes don't take advantage of these incentives is because they're just too complicated to figure out? And a lot of them said yes. So some of the brain damage that we go through as professionals is we have to figure all that out for them, and it's an added value to the communities we serve, but it's a lot of work to get our brains around some of these tax credits and interest rate buy downs and things like that. But if there's a way to save some money, and one incentive I just was made aware of, the counties association is really promoting this, is a energy efficiency incentive for financing new equipment that's energy efficient. And on the surface, it might not look like it would save a company a lot of money, but in the end it could. And so our job is to find out what's really necessary. One of my pet peeves when a developer or a new project comes to a community and says, well, I want to do this. What can you do for us? And how many times have we heard that? Every time. I always say, what do you need? Because it might be something that's a lot easier than, sometimes it's $8 million that we don't have. Other times it's something easier that we can provide in a different manner.
So I'm going to veer off the track of the financial incentives because I think my colleagues covered that fairly well. But yeah, the answer is always, where's the gap? What's the gap we need to fill here? Financial incentives are an important tool. They're icing on the cake, right? So if the cake's no good to begin with, I don't care how much icing you put on it, it may not still be a good cake. But there are other things. I encourage all municipalities, take a look at every single thing that you can legally control and think about using that to incent the types of investment that you want. But aside from that, there are other things communities can do outside of throw money at projects, right? Sometimes you do have to level the playing field. But in an apples-to-apples situation, it's all the other things that you bring forth that may win you the deal. So concierge type services, right? I've worked in communities where we had these types of services, and I had touched on it a little bit earlier, but where someone was responsible for coordinating all of these services that could do everything from helping people to relocate to your community and giving them the exact service that they need, right? So it's not, here are our services, you choose one. It's what do you need? It's understanding what their needs are and then making sure that you're helping them find the housing that works for them, the child care situation that works for them, the schools that work for them, the recreational activities, if they want to join a Y or they're looking for a Pilates studio or whatever, right? But it's somebody who is coordinating all of that, making sure that happens. I've worked in communities where we had packages that had been negotiated. So we had a list of banks that would give reduced mortgage rates for a certain length of time. We had rental associations with condos and townhouses where they would do a reduced rent rate for a certain amount of time for people who are relocating, people who are coming to your community. There's a whole host of services, car purchasing and car lease discounts, but somebody has to be responsible for coordinating all of that, managing all of that, and that's a big part of what we do when we say our community is open for business, we welcome business, we truly are business friendly. And then to Bob's point earlier, right, because I don't want to miss this, that expedited process, boy, cannot put enough emphasis on that. When a business is trying to get something done in your community, having a single point of contact, one person who will see to it that that business's needs are met. Business loves certainty. So if you can explain to the business right up front and give them something in writing that says, here is our process, here is our timeline, and here is our cost to get you from where you are today to your doors open, and give it to them up front and stick to it.
All right. Thank you, Vicki. Appreciate that. Well, I got a follow-up question, though, because you guys were all nodding your heads while you're talking about, hey, the streamlined process. And I think streamlined doesn't mean you just roll over, of course, right? You need to make sure you protect the interests of the community. I don't want people to confuse that, but you guys all were like, yes, yes, yes. Why do you think communities are reluctant to embrace that type of approach? What's standing in their way to do that? Anybody can feel that.
I don't know what would be standing in their way. I think just not knowing any better, not having the right people to do that work. My very first job in economic development was for the city of Wausau as that person. I was the business development director, and it was my job to whisk those businesses through the process, the bureaucratic process, as painlessly and effectively as possible. And I would hold their hand through rezonings and finding, I remember walking up to the engineering department one day and saying, you just told this company they have to raise the level of their lot 2 feet so the water runs in a certain direction. That's going to be really expensive for them. Couldn't we just dig a ditch in the back of their property? And the engineering department, well, that would be one solution. I said, can you recommend that, please? Well, no, we can. And I said, well, I'm going to then, because that's way more effective than making this business raise the level of their 2-acre lot 2 feet and then building their building so the stormwater runs in the right direction. And it's that kind of thing that, is thinking outside the box and being creative. I think maybe it comes down to resources and maybe not having that one person. I mean, we had a planning department, a zoning department, an engineering department. We had all those people in their roles, but somebody to manage it all in that capacity, and I think that's...
Yeah, and the only thing I would add, obviously it's a staffing level in different size communities, but I think the leadership, this is where leadership comes back again. It's not, we want to say no, it's how do you get to yes? And those are the questions that need to be asked. If you want to be truly welcoming, it's how do you get to yes? And again, in any development project, there's a lot of regulations, whether it's the DNR or the municipality or access permits from a county and a state and all these things. That's what our jobs are. But to communicate those, define those, and how do you get to yes, building the relationships with those people who have those decision-making authorities, because ultimately everybody wins when those things happen.
If you don't mind, I have one thing to add. We did consult with a community that wanted an overhaul on they called it a community development department, but they had 5 planners and no customer service type, ambassador type community development or economic development type people. And that was fine. Planners have a very important role and they do their jobs very well, but they are trained to be by the book in a black and white fashion and this following the rules, and that doesn't leave any room for creativity or problem solving or customer service. It just was their role. So through attrition and other things, we advised them to downsize on the planning and upsize on the community and economic development.
I mean, these are the war stories that economic developers tell each other at conferences when we just kind of keep slapping ourselves.
It's like therapy.
It is therapy. We keep slapping ourselves in the forehead going, you cannot believe this, right? Because we've all lived it. We've all seen it where, municipal government gets in its own way. And when you step in as the economic developer and say, hey, can we think about this differently? Because I think the goal here is to get the business open, right? So let's think about doing this differently. And you run into, Nate's question is, why don't they? Well, because we've always done it that way. And I think that's been part of it. Certainly in my practice in 5 different states, that's what I've seen over and over again. But jumping in there and being that person that's willing to take the heat. I remember reading New York State building code so that I could go argue with the code enforcement officer who was insisting that this business spend, an extra $100,000 to do something that they didn't need to do. That was his interpretation of the code, but it wasn't actually written that way. This crazy stuff. It just happens all the time. We need to think about it differently. I always use the phrase, make it easy for the private sector to put their capital at risk in your dot on the map. Make it easy. So if you're going to make it easy, tell them what you expect from them up front, and also let them know what they should expect from you. Right? So at the municipal level, it's here are our guidelines, here is our process, here is our timeline. We're going to stick to this, and we're going to get you where you need to be.
Thank you guys for elaborating on that point. At this point in time, we've got a couple other questions, but I'd rather kind of open it up to the audience. I think that, Kristen, Vicki, Bob have given everybody here some things to think about, might have piqued some curiosity. So maybe you've got a question in general or, specific to their fields or their communities they're working in. I see Steve over here, and Joel's in this back part of the room. Would you mind raising your hand, and they'll come over to you, and you can use the microphone and ask the question?
Yeah, I sure appreciated the presentation today. I think it pointed in a variety of ways and directions that we need to consider. One of the leadership principles that I learned in the Marine Corps, which just has stayed with me, is that our individual success in life is going to be far more affected not by how we build on our successes, but how we overcome and deal with our weaknesses. Seems to me like a lot of communities have a variety of weaknesses. And one that seems to be quite common from my perspective is, notwithstanding a variety of wonderful initiatives, very positive things happening in the community, it seems like there are always those components in the community who really couldn't care less about the overall success and the image of the community. Take, for instance, in the downtown area, businesses that just seem to be perfectly content being lousy neighbors. They're just in it for themselves. They don't care about anybody else. They're not willing to invest in their property, and they are perfectly willing to reach the lowest possible denominator as far as their view of what's success. Now, is it your view, and would, for instance, a community like Watertown be benefited by being more aggressive in forcing those bad actors to toe the line? For every success that we can tout, it seems to me it's diminished by those present entities that are just projecting, I couldn't care less, and there they sit year after year. Perfect example, there are businesses with signage downtown that looked lousy 25 years ago, and it's just as lousy today, except it's 25 years older. And I'm thinking, could enforcement to a more aggressive perspective help compensate for some weaknesses and help to maybe highlight the many successes that we have?
So that was a lot, and I'll try to address different pieces because and you referenced the success piece. Again, having been in this business both as a planner, a zoning administrator, a city administrator, and now just the economic development guy, which is a great position to be in, because now you can be positive. And one of the key things, and that, as you go through, is in any, well, I would say business and government, you're not going to ever please everybody. So again, understanding that and building on that success piece, sometimes by surrounding yourself with those people who are willing to make those choices. I can tell you in my downtown, after we got done with our process, the one area we felt was going to be our first redevelopment area is likely going to be our last. These are very visible people in my community. There's investment happening everywhere. So in some ways, I'm surrounding myself with people who want to be a success because they all know who owns these pieces of property. And the hope is, because again, that's a policy decision by the local unit of government. If they want to deal with private property rights and the legal fees associated with being aggressive, we've had to do it. It's not a fun time. It's not a fun process. Locally, you need to make that decision for the right reasons. But again, sometimes it's the outside community who are watching the positive activities happening saying, well, why isn't anything happening there? And then starting to understand who those players are in hopes that they will become part of the process. We have several instances of that in our community, and trying to be proactive with that. Because, yeah, you're not going to force somebody to do it in a non-legal way. If they maintain the property and pay their tax bill, sometimes there's not a lot we can do unless you take the next step, which is to condemn it or take it by eminent domain, which is a very, very aggressive form of trying to make some things happen. And we've had to do that too, but you got to pick those battles.
So I think the code enforcement issue is one that I think you mentioned earlier. The community may be deteriorating. It didn't take overnight to get there. It's taken a long time for some of these buildings to deteriorate and for these bad actors to continue to be bad actors. But code enforcement is important, and hitting the owners of the buildings in the pocketbook is one way to get their attention. So I think, especially when you have an absentee landlord, that's a tough one because they don't care. They're just collecting a rent check from the business that's in there. Finding out the true intentions of every property owner downtown is something we've done in communities, and then transition properties where the owner doesn't have an interest in owning and maintaining that property. Maybe an entity, a government entity like an RDA or a city buys that property and then transitions it. We've advised communities and taken properties on tax deeds, fixed them up, invested money in them, and then sold them to become property tax paying entities again. That's a very targeted strategy. The city of Watertown has money in the budget for 2019 to hire a part-time code enforcement administrator for downtown. And the RDA is going to be working very closely with that person to target low-hanging fruit and really bad actors and get as aggressive as we can legally with them and put some pressure on them. And the other thing that is true and has happened in communities we've worked in is once somebody starts improving their property, and then another person, it starts to go viral, and pretty soon they're looking around going, my building looks the worst on the block, I better do something here. And then we can either come at it from a code enforcement angle or come at it from a how can we help you improve your building. And hopefully we're doing both, because the RDA and Main Street have partnered on some projects, and we're hopefully working together from both angles.
I would just, say that all of that is true. All of that has to happen. But in certain communities that I've worked in and abutted and been partners with, that very aggressive, the whole broken window approach, right? We're just not going to tolerate that anymore. And getting very aggressive with your code enforcement, cleaning up the streets, those kinds of things, have turned some communities around. I mean, just literally turned them around. But again, you have to have the staff to do that. You have to have the will to do that. And you have to be willing to take the heat. I've been through an eminent domain process. It's not pretty. But if that's what you need to do in order to get that piece of land ready for the type of investment that you really want, again, what do you want is what you're doing, getting you what you want, and what are you willing to do to get what you want? Just keep asking yourself that.
Thank you, guys.
The only other thing I do want to add, and again, but also understand that even though those property owners may not have an interest in doing things, I don't forget about them. Developers come to my community and say, hey, I'm looking for a project. Who do you think I send them to? Because I'm just trying to help you better utilize your property for the betterment of the community. So they know, I'm not just saying I don't want to deal with you. I'm still trying to deal with them. But I'm sending people to them saying, there's definitely interest in this area, this community from a development perspective. Maybe if you don't want to do it, there are people behind there looking to be able to do that to help move our community forward.
Thank you, Bob. Another question? Got one up here.
Thank you. Have you had any experience developing carrot solutions as opposed to stick solutions to get what you want to have happen in the community?
Sure. I mean, again, we just talked about getting people to invest in their own investments. Our carrot solution is a $5,000 grant for somebody to fix up their downtown storefront. So that's led to 30 storefronts being fixed up, which led to the corner building that's being redone right now. That wasn't a stick. That was, hey, how did that work? And hey, how do we get a community development investment grant from the state to partner with the city to make the gem of our downtown what it should be, not what it was? So again, some of those things are incremental and they have to be. But then the big one happens, and you need to be ready for that. I mean, that's a big dollar amount for any unit of government and for that property owner who purchased it 6 months ago to put into it. But the lasting impact of that is tremendous. The community is just looking at it going, wow, look what they did here. And it is that public-private partnership, that collaboration, that willing to take the risk on behalf of the public sector and partnering with the private sector to make it happen and truly make it special. So all of the above. I mean, sometimes it is incremental, but the wins come when people really see the activity happening.
Bob, to that point, I know Ty's here with the Bank Lake Mills. I see Tom Pash, Exonia Bank, and the Exonia Bank crew here, as well as our bank came together with the city to lend some money for downtown. Talk about a carrot. I mean, we've lent over, what's the dollar amount? I'll lose track. $290,000. So privately, we've stepped at an extremely low interest rate. The city put some money in that pot. Plus, we've given some grants out to incentivize. And, Bill Limbaugh one example. I mean, and Ryan Jones, his building, the old book building, where that bookstore on the corner on 3rd Street. There's a couple others I just can't think off the top of my head. But, we're doing things in this community that are carrots. So I don't, I think sometimes people overlook and forget about these incentives. But we're collaborating. Main Street's been a great partner in helping identify some future potential projects as well on their facade grant. So, any other questions? We've got a few minutes.
Curious, with all the economic developments in Milwaukee and Madison, I know we're kind of an outlying rural community here, but are there ways that we can leverage these big events occurring in the major cities around us to better our local community?
Yes. I mean, your point, and again, from the commercial real estate world, that is the sticking point. We are in the middle. The brokers make their money on the big deals in Milwaukee and Madison. I mean, part of the things, we need to continue to do is build those relationships, banks, commercial real estate people. That awareness, the more and more we do, that awareness becomes out there. Interestingly, building those relationships is key. The bankers live in our community, the commercial real estate people live in our communities, and getting to know them and that awareness starts to breed through those types of elements. I mean, that's an important piece, that laying that groundwork of, they may not be looking today, but they're looking at all different times, and they represent tenants and they represent people, and when activity starts to happen, those relationships truly are a benefit to communities as you continue to move forward.
And to add to Bob's point, I mean, it really is about relationship building. And so making sure that, a lot of, my mother used to say that she finally figured out what economic development was when I had her at an event with me. She said, oh, they pay you to schmooze. And I was like, well, kinda, yeah. But it's so important to be at those places where you get to meet the real estate executives, where you get to spend time with the developers, where you get to build those relationships. Because yes, we see the development in Madison, we see the development in Milwaukee. We are attached to both regional organizations in both directions. But we also do that kind of outreach to the folks that are engaged in putting those dollars into the ground in those communities, make sure that they know about our opportunities, right? So our sites, our buildings, our businesses, and the opportunities that are here in this Madwaukee region, in this place in between the two. So it's an important part of what we do. I think we all do it to various degrees, but it really is an important part of what we do. And yes, Mom, they pay me to schmooze.
I just want to add that I've worked in a lot of small communities, and it's so difficult to attract a developer from a Madison and a Milwaukee to a small community. So it's always important to look for the local money. Look for the local folks who are willing to invest in their community. And that's where the local community is going to benefit the most is from the people. And it's not always easy to find, but they're there and they do want to invest. And so they know the community, they have pride in the community, they've got all their memories here. And that is much more impactful than trying, and we used to call it elephant hunting. We could try to hunt the elephants all day long and never get anywhere, but if you turn inward and look for the local opportunities for local people to invest in their own community, that's probably going to take a small community a lot farther.
Well, I thank you guys for your time and your insights today. Hopefully you all got to learn a couple of new pieces of information about economic development, about community growth, planning. At this point in time, I want to say thank you. If you've got questions, feel free to approach any of our panelists here. They're going to be here for a little bit. We're all going to have some breakfast and talk. So thank you for attending today. Steve, anything that you want to end with?
Yeah, you've all received, hopefully by now, a copy of a survey that's been passed up your tables. If you would please take a couple of minutes to fill that out before you leave, we would greatly appreciate that. Vicki is trying to survey the community a little bit through our marketing team, and it would be helpful if you could complete that. It would help one of our students. It's his project. So I either flunk him or I pass him based on how you participate in the survey. No pressure. So if you would please do that, we'd greatly appreciate it. Also on your tables were some flyers about our golf classic. We would love to have you join us. We've decided not to do it in May this year. Tired of competing with the weather. So it'll be June the 7th with a guarantee of a beautiful day. Right. It is Wisconsin. But we are talking June the 7th. There's opportunities for you to participate both as a player, as a sponsor. If you'd just like to give us a gift, that'd be great. But those brochures are on your table, so please avail yourself of those as well. And then please note April the 4th. It should be a wonderful conversation about sustainability, solar energy, and specifically the solar wind farm down in Jefferson. April the 4th, Dan Litchfield from Invenergy will be with us to talk about the various projects they have going on, all right? This great crowd. Appreciate you all coming out, and as Nate said, we're very thankful that it wasn't yesterday. Our grounds crew would have had the snow plowed for you, but I'm not real sure if you would have gotten here anyways. But thanks a lot for coming. See you April 4th. Have a great day.